Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, I have a few questions. Earlier this year, at a music festival in Austin, you noted that climate change is an existential threat. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And by existential threat, you mean it threatens the very existence of humanity right now. Is that your belief?
Well, right now, I would say no. We know that we have a goal to get to net zero carbon emissions by 2050, but we also know that every single year we see escalating weather events that are existential threats to communities around the globe, including in the United States.
So what's the timeline?
Well, we want to make sure that we do not see more than 1.5 degrees of increase because the rise in sea levels, the impacts on the ecosystems around the world.
So even if you accept the premise that human beings can sort of control the weather here long term, right? That there aren't larger forces, that the Earth is either cooling or it's warming, and that has happened, since the existence of our planet. That has happened, and you have this net zero goal by 2050. You would agree, though, that if China and India are not on board, it's a fool's errand, correct?
We want China and India.
No, but they're not.
Well, they are moving in that direction. I mean, China.
Well, actually, and this leads to the second question. You've said that there's a lot to learn from what China is doing. China accounts for a full 25% of the world's emissions, correct?
Correct, and we want them to stop that.
Okay, but they're not. They're not stopping that. India's not stopping that. So I think the concern that I have and the folks back home have is that the United States of America, which has all the natural resources it will ever need, okay, is tying one arm behind our back for reliable energy. While China, the world's biggest polluter, you give a free pass to and you praise to at this same music festival saying we've got a lot to learn from China. When the reality is, if China's not on board with your plan, even if you agreed with that being the goal, it's not going to make a difference at all. So all we're left with is higher costs here at home, and we're less secure at home because we're relying on other countries for energy, like Venezuela, like Saudi Arabia. And I want to ask you, since Joe Biden has taken office, he's drawn down 40% of that strategic petroleum reserve, correct?
It has been drawn down by about 180 million barrels.
I think that's 40%. But we haven't had sort of an emergency that would cause it, other than I think he wanted to probably try to get gas prices lower.
War in Ukraine is the emergency that caused it.
That's why we shipped those petroleum reserves to China? Because of the war in Ukraine? I'm sorry.
No, we released 1 million barrels per day for 6 months to stabilize the global production.
But we shipped those to China.
No.
China was the highest bidder. And those strategic petroleum went to China.
The strategic petroleum reserves are released on a global market.
So Ukraine is the reason then why we drew down by 40% our strategic petroleum reserves and sent them to China.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine pulled millions of barrels of oil off the market, causing a constriction in supply.
Madam Secretary, I'm sorry. I would argue that this president and this administration's war on American energy started well before Ukraine. It started well before a year ago. And you're right in the middle of that. Telling people that they have to live with less.
We are not telling people they
absolutely
have to live with
less.
You are. No, we
we
want energy to be abundant. We want it to be made in the United States.
If you really believed in an all of the above approach, I would believe you, but you don't. That has certainly not been the direction of this administration and your agency. It just hasn't. And I do want to ask you, so we talked about China. I want to ask you about Microvast, which is a lithium battery company that operates primarily out of the People's Republic of China. Your agency granted $200 million worth of a grant to this company. You're aware of this, correct?
There were awards there were selections that were named, and all of those companies are going through vetting process to ensure that there's no money flowing to countries of concern. And so those vetting processes are going on. Not a dollar has gone out the door yet.
Okay, and I think you got a letter from a member of the Senate asking what those security protocols are and what the test is. You could see how concerning it would be that Chinese-owned businesses or companies.
We don't want to see the dollars going to any countries of concern. We want them to be coming.
So is it your commitment that no dollars will go to any company, any energy company, taking advantage of either tax credits or grants that are owned by China? by a Chinese company?
No state-owned enterprise will get funding from the bipartisan infrastructure.
What about companies that have material operations in China, which we know, of course, that intellectual property
That's why
is sold?
we're using this CFIUS vetting program to be able to identify exactly where the control is of a particular technology and country. We want to make sure
Okay.
that
Well, I
those
look forward to
countries
working with you.
are, that we are the beneficiaries of those acts and not others.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Schmitt.